Welcome to the Women Changing the World podcast, a podcast on a mission to bring you some of the most amazing women I know who are doing incredible things to generally make the world a better place. From corporate sustainability to straight up magic and everything in between, you'll meet the real life humans who are birthing the new. I'm your host, Liz Best, and I'm here to amplify the stories and voices of women who are changing the world. Hello, I am so excited for today's conversation with Marssie Versola, founder and CEO of The Impact Table. If you haven't already heard, I am collaborating with Marssie and The Impact Table this fall on the Connect and Elevate retreat in Calistoga, October 27th to 29th. And I could not be more excited about how amazing this experience is going to be. So obviously we had to talk about our vision and the why behind the creation of this one-of-a-kind multi-generational retreat for impact and sustainability leaders, how we're approaching our collaboration, and what aspects we're most excited about. Marssie also shared what's currently keeping her occupied. Hint, it includes both a farm and goats, her professional journey to this moment, and her top recommendation for anyone who is looking for more connection and community in your life and is ready to take action. She shared how connection and being in the room with other leaders has been a game changer in her career, the frustrating moments that led her to seek out space to connect with her peers, and her vision for what she's building through the Impact Table. A bit more about Marssie. She is creativity meets leadership and execution heads on. Marssie is a seasoned business leader with experience building multiple multi-million-dollar organizations and working with individuals at every stage in their personal and professional journeys, from the senior-most leaders of billion-dollar companies to volunteer workers at brand new nonprofits. With a passion for inspiring and engaging individuals, groups, and communities through experiences that transform, she leads with contagious enthusiasm and a deep commitment to people, purpose, and positivity. Marssie is the founder and CEO of The Impact Table, a community designed to connect, support, and elevate mission-driven women leaders. Wearing her heart on her sleeve, Marssie isn't afraid to challenge the traditional approach to business. She is a champion for creating spaces in and outside of the workplace that invite individuals to show up as whole and unique humans, connect deeply, and feel supported and celebrated so that together we can thrive. I just know you're going to enjoy this conversation with Marssie as much as we did, and I cannot wait to hear what you think. Please do not hesitate to join us in Calistoga this fall because, as you can hopefully tell from the conversation, it is going to be magic. I am so excited to have Marssie Versola, founder and CEO of Impact Table here. Welcome to the podcast, Marssie.
Thanks, Liz. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so looking forward to our conversation. Before we dive in, would you mind just briefly introducing yourself to our listeners?
Absolutely. Hi, listeners. Hi, Liz. I'm so excited to be here. My name is Marssie Versola, and I build businesses that help humanity. I am the founder of the Impact Table, and really what you should know about me is that I believe deeply in people, purpose, and positivity, and I know that you share that as well, Liz. So really just excited to be here with you on your podcast today and to have a really fun conversation.
Awesome. I'm so excited too. I feel like there's some really fun parallels and synergy in the work that we get to do. And we're collaborating on something really fun, which I know we'll get to talk about today. Would love to just start by hearing a little bit more about what you're currently up to, both on a personal level and professionally.
Yeah, happy to. So, as I mentioned, I'm the creator of the Impact Table, which is a community designed for mission driven women leaders. And we support the leaders who support our communities. So, we do this through professional coaching, peer advisory, celebrating moments that matter, and really curating experiences, which we will talk about our in person experience that you and I are curating together, but curating experiences for women in impact to really help them thrive. So, professionally, my days look really different all the time, being kind of very early in the stages that we are in building our business. And personally, I have 4 kids. We have 4 goats. I have a dog named Penny. And I am right now obsessed with actually redesigning our outside garden space. We moved to a farm during the pandemic, so we were one of those families. And to be honest, I am not a farmer. So our beautiful farm needs a little bit of love and care. So right now I am completely obsessed with just making the outside of our home and our little farm beautiful and thriving. And so that's what you can find me up to these days.
Oh, that's so fun. And I had no idea about the goats.
Well, we started with alpacas. So when we moved during the pandemic, I thought it would be a really great idea to get alpacas. And so we started with 3 alpacas. And at the time, my daughter was 1, my son was 3, my younger kids. And then my older daughter, I think, was about 13. And my husband was still actually living in Marin half time. And so it was basically me with these 2 small kids and a teenager. And we got alpacas. Long story short, they were really fuzzy and really cute. And it didn't work out. They stayed for a couple of months and were, again, really adorable, but they're also apparently prey animal, which I didn't know. So they wanted nothing to do with us. I learned how to put them in a headlock because they had something happen with their eyes where they got a little something happening with their eyes, and I had to put eye drops in their eyes every day for 3 weeks. It was a whole thing. So the alpacas had to go. And a couple years later, I've now recovered. And now we have baby goats, which are so much more entertaining, so friendly, so cute, and want to be our friends. They want to play with us all the time. So I recommend goats over alpacas.
That is just such a great fun fact. I love too that you have 4 kids and 4 kids.
Yes. Me too.
Oh, how awesome. Well, I'm sure we could talk about the farm all day. Something I really love asking people about on the podcast is your journey and what brought you to this point, what brought you to this moment. I know our listeners really appreciate hearing about the twists and turns that we go through to get to where we are today, and would really invite you, I'm sure I'm going to learn something about you and hearing your full story, to take up space and tell us your story and how you came to create the Impact Table and be doing the work that you do now.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. I'm happy to share. So I started in the nonprofit sector actually about 20 years ago. And I had graduated from college with a degree in psychology, not really knowing what I wanted to do with my life. And yet I knew I wanted to work with passionate people. And so I'd had this seed of an idea planted in my mind, where better to find passionate people than in the nonprofit sector where people don't get paid a lot of money. And I look back at that now and I think it's a little bit sad, a little bit broken thinking. And also there was some truth and unfortunately some truth to that. But I started in the nonprofit sector right out of college, and as one does, who's very ambitious and wants to take on a lot in an under-resourced organization, I grew really quickly and I was able to grow in my role pretty quickly over about 3.5 years. And yet, about that time, I started looking around at my peers and seeing them hockey stick in their growth in the for-profit sector. And I saw them accessing opportunities that simply weren't available to me. And I saw them earning way more money than I could even dream of in the role that I was in. And so I came to a crossroads, and I realized through some research and through conversations that either I was going to have to elevate to the role of executive director at the age of 25, or I was going to have to leave the nonprofit sector in order to earn what I needed to earn to stay in the community that I had grown up in. And so at that point, I decided that I needed to leave the sector because unfortunately, I didn't see a lot of professional development opportunities for me. And I certainly wasn't ready to be an executive director. So path one, was not available. And so I decided to leave the sector and had a really great opportunity to move into brand and marketing and community affairs and sort of cause marketing before it was a thing. And stayed in that space for a couple of years, got to work with some really exciting brands, fun brands like the Lego Group, Fiji Water. And towards the end of that season, I was working with a really fun company. It was a startup called Pop Chips. We were in San Francisco. It was the headquarters. And this brand was like on fire. It was growing really quickly. And it was a really fun team. A lot of the people had come from Smart Water, and Vitamin Water, which had just been acquired in some like record-setting acquisition. But I realized at the end of that season that I was selling potato chips. And, we were the healthier snack. And a lot of what I was doing was in community, but the purpose-driven part of me just really wasn't being fulfilled. And so at that time, I transitioned back really directly into social impact and had worked for the past 10 years at the intersection of technology and social good. So had the opportunity to lead two different businesses, technology businesses that helped to raise hundreds of millions of dollars for thousands of organizations and lead the go-to-market in the US, or in North America rather. And that was a really incredible opportunity to make really powerful impact. And as I came to the end of that season, what I was experiencing was, I believe, that glass ceiling that we've all learned about, that I had learned about since I was a little girl. And, something just didn't feel right. And I wasn't able to step forward in my leadership, in my growth. And, one of the formative experiences that I sometimes share about, it's honestly, if I'm really honest, it's still awkward and uncomfortable to share about. But one of the most formative experiences that I had as a leader over the second decade of my career was being in a role where 7 times the person above me stepped out of their role, and the person above me was replaced by another white man. And as a multiracial woman leader who was over delivering on the role that I was in, was absolutely ready, at least by like 3 or 4 years in, to step into that leadership role, I just couldn't crack the code. I just couldn't figure out how to elevate into that next level of leadership. And I want to be clear, like a lot of the men that stepped into that role were really smart. One of them in particular was really brilliant. I learned a lot from some of those people. And, I also know today that I was at a disadvantage. And so just being a woman, also being a multiracial woman, I absolutely was at a disadvantage. And so I realized at the end of that season how much I had been navigating alone. And for most of my career, up until I was almost 40, I navigated on my own, just kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall, seeing what would stick, really trying to use Google a lot. Certainly there were women in the organizations that I worked for and men that I respected and learned from. But when it came to really navigating that career journey, that impact journey, we call it, and I call it, a leadership journey or impact journey. And when it came to navigating that journey, I did a lot of it in a silo. I did a lot of it solo. And I didn't have a community of other smart, business-oriented, impact-minded women around me outside of the people on my direct teams. And, there's many things as you're navigating this journey that just aren't appropriate to talk to with the people who are on your direct teams, especially if you are a leader or even within an organization. And so I had this experience where I just realized I was doing it alone. And I joined a community that was specifically for women aspiring to be in executive leadership. And it was a game changer. Instantly, I felt supported. I was connected. I felt celebrated. I felt like I could take more risks because I knew that if I fell, I wasn't going to have to deal with it on my own. And it was a really powerful experience. At the time, also, it was post COVID, and I was also turning 40 or had turned 40. And that's a really pivotal year. That, at least for me, that was a really kind of big milestone where I started to evaluate, how do I want to spend my time? What do I want to give to the world? What do I have to give? And what do I want to give? And I'm at a place in my life where I actually got to choose to step out of the role that I was in. And it was a really hard decision. A lot of the people who I had worked with had been with me through marriage, through multiple births of my children. Most of them I actually only worked with virtually. I had been remote since far before COVID, like way before remote was a thing. So a lot of them I only worked with virtually, but they felt like family. They felt like really dear colleagues and friends. And so it was a hard decision. And also the impact we were making was really meaningful, but I knew that something had to change. And so I made a decision to step out of that role. And there had been this calling on my heart to create something like the impact table. I didn't quite know exactly what it was. And, I had looked around at the time, and this actually, I think, was even before you had founded Girls Club Collective, because I remember the time that I was looking, there was nothing. There was really nothing. And this was, probably late 2022. I just really had this knowing that women in impact need a space to connect and learn and grow together. And that when we do, we become more potent. We are able to be more impactful. We are able to thrive in ways that we just simply can't on our own. So I decided to start the impact table, and we're about a year in, and it's been a really beautiful experience. And, I also have seen more of these communities start to come to life, which is such a beautiful thing, because I think you and I both agree that women need these spaces. We have to have these spaces to be able to connect with each other, to be able to celebrate each other, to be able to feel supported. And it actually is part of our evolution, right? Like this convening, this gathering is something that we've been doing for centuries. And so it's a really beautiful thing. So that's a little bit about my journey and, why I decided to create the impact table. I think that there are many opportunities for men in particular to gather on the golf course, if you will. And it's not about an us or them, but it is about ensuring that we as women, especially women in social impact, have a safe place to come together and to connect with each other and to do the work that we do.
Totally. Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story in full. And I'm so sorry that happened to you. I appreciate you sharing the vulnerable details of what started your search for community and your professional career. I don't talk a lot about this, but I just often remember the fact that I, by some miracle, was raised in a way where I never really thought that there was something I couldn't do because I was a woman until I got to corporate America. And then it was like such a wild, one, wow, what a privilege. How is it possible that I hadn't really taken anything off the table for myself until now? And two, wow, I'm looking around, I'm looking at the executive suite, and there's a very clear pattern here. And it's not people who feel or look or sound or think like I do, which is such a shame because we all win, as we both know, with diverse leadership. And there's so many amazing, brilliant, awesome humans who we need to elevate to help us bring about the future that we so want and need.
That's right. That's right.
It's interesting because we started the first version of the Girls Club, the Mastermind, back in fall of 2021. That was just like our first pilot baby. But I feel like we must have been working behind the scenes around the same time, because we launched GCC January 2023 after like probably a year of behind the scenes work. And it's been really cool. I totally agree to see the proliferation of different community approaches for change makers, because individualism is so ridiculous, and it's so clear that we need mutual support and celebration and relationships to bring about, we need a movement to bring about a better future. And that's really hard to do when we're all operating like in our own silos, which is also really lonely and not sustainable.
That's right. That's right. And just to go back to what you had said about your experience in corporate America, what we know about the impact space is that 73% of the workforce in impact are women, or identify as women. And yet when you look at the executive leadership tables, that percentage and that ratio starts to shift back down. And so I believe that we need to ensure that at least the percentage of women in the workforce in the impact area, it's equally represented, if not more, in leadership. What an important thing to be able to do is to model and to show what it looks like to be a woman leader in impact. And at the impact table, we're really committed to building a multi-generational community of women in social impact, because, I think back to that 25-year-old version of myself that didn't know which way to turn. And I've often talked about being 4 years old and feeling like watching Care Bears. I remember being on the couch, snuggling up with my dad and watching the Care Bears, and just feeling this kinship to those bears because they had this light that shined from their heart. And I felt a kinship with those bears, and I still feel that light today. And I've always had this kind of purpose driven connection to my way of being in the world. And I remember being in fourth grade, and I was a cheerleader when I was young. And I remember they had a volunteer day, and can't say that I quite even knew what volunteering was, but they said that we'd go clean up the community. And I thought, that sounds great. So I raised my hand and I showed up, and this was a group of 400, 500 youth in the community, and there were 6 of us there. And I remember thinking, why aren't there more kids here? Why are we the only ones here to do this really important work? And we got featured in the newspaper, which was really affirming and very fun. But, this desire to create impact, to be of service, to be a positive light in the world has just been with me for so long. And I think that there's so many of us that carry that same desire, that same knowing that, we're here to leave this place better than we found it. And when we don't have models of women in leadership who are practicing those same ideas, who are upholding these ideas of the financial picture is important, yes, but it's not the only thing that's important. The other pieces of a purpose-driven organization are equally as important, if not more. And so what I'm trying to say is just that I believe that having role models of women in leadership who are in impactful businesses and impactful roles is so important. It's important for us as senior leaders to be able to see each other and support each other. And it's so important for those 25-year-olds or those younger leaders who have a desire, have a vision to create a better world and want to be able to step into that. And so yes, to being able to create community and to be able to elevate voices so that we can normalize this idea of actually doing good work in the world. Not, again, to position it as either or, but to normalize the idea of doing really good, important work in the world and being able to do well in the world at the same time.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm such a big believer that, like, if I was queen of the universe, the people who do the most good are the people who should make the most money, which is so unfortunately not the reality that we live in today. But I think to your point, and I so love that story, how do we also like connect with the other helpers, whatever stage of someone's journey that they're on? Everyone has something valuable to offer, I think, in terms of like insight and perspective and support. And so, how do we like create more spaces and opportunities? And I know this is so much of what we're both doing, but I just am going back to like the Care Bear visual of like with the people whose like hearts are shining, like, how do we make it easy to find each other and to have those conversations and to have that space?
Yeah. Well, and I think a couple of things. For a long time, impact work was really consolidated to the nonprofit sector. Or it felt like in order to do good in the world, you had to be in a nonprofit. And I think there's so much opportunity for those who work in CSR and ESG and tech for good and B Corp and social enterprises to come together with the leaders in nonprofit and learn from each other. And so when we define social impact, we define it with a really wide lens. You know, if you are a mission driven woman and you consider yourself a leader, that's the other thing is that we get so caught up about this idea of what it means to be a leader. You don't have to manage people to be a leader. You're a leader if you're a leader and you have a vision for how you desire the world to be, and you invite others to come along. And that was the second thing I was going to say, which is, I think, how do we bring more people together, more of those heart-centered, light-shining, whatever you want to call them, mission-driven women and men and non-binary and all gender inclusive. How do we bring human beings together? Is my experience has been we invite them. And that has been such a beautiful part of building the impact table, is when I can show up fully centered in the desire that I have to create more good in the world and just invite others to come along. It is a beautiful experience. And the more invitations that we have through the impact table, through the Girls Club Collective, through the other beautiful places in the world where people are coming together, I think the better, right? It's all about having those invitations. And then for the folks who are being invited, it's about having the courage to accept the invitation and subscribe to a different narrative.
Absolutely. And the courage too to be willing to be seen in process and be vulnerable and be messy and maybe show up imperfectly and not with all your polished talking points, and really lean into those relationships.
Absolutely.
I know obviously we're both big proponents of surrounding ourselves with others who lift us up and of connection. And you've already shared, I think, some key stories about your experience and why this is so important to you personally. But I'd also love to invite you to share anything else that's on your heart about like why this is something you care so deeply about and why this feels like your work to do in the world in this moment.
Well, I think what I'll share about is it was about 2 months into building the impact table, and a dear friend of mine who's actually a white guy, he gifted me a book called Huddle. And Brooke Baldwin is her name, is the author's name. The stories and her writing is all about her experience in spending several years researching this idea of huddling. And what she defines huddling as is the act of women coming together to support each other. And I mentioned it earlier, but she goes deep into the research of the evolution of humanity being really rooted in women coming together. And it started as a safety mechanism. It started when we were in the time when, we needed to be safe together, either from wild animals or from other humans, etc. And, that evolved with us into where we are today, which is when we come together as women, we become more potent. It really, at least that has been my experience. It's been my lived experience. This book that I am referencing was a really amazing affirmation of the work that I just had this knowing that was needed. I felt so affirmed when I was given this book. And it's just this powerful experience of coming together as women. And she calls it huddling. We call it gathering. We have other names for how we convene our members. But when that happens, when we feel seen, when we feel supported, when we feel celebrated, when we feel safe, the way that we show up in the world, it changes. It changes. It changes our behavior. It changes our ability to take risks, as I mentioned before. It changes our confidence. It changes the conversations that we have, the questions that we ask, the roles that we go after. And so this is so important to me because I have a daughter. I have two daughters. I have a 4-year-old daughter and a 16-year-old daughter. I have a niece. I believe so deeply that they need to grow up in a world where they see women doing really incredible, important work in the world, and that we pave the path for them. And, you had mentioned before the challenge of showing up to the corporate sector with, not a lot of representation in the boardrooms. And, it's true. It is still true today. And we've made progress since my mom was entering the workforce, since her mom was entering the workforce. And, I think it was like as recent as 1964 that women couldn't even have a credit card without their husband's signature. And so we've made progress. And yet there's so much more that we can do. And there's another really amazing thought leader named Lynn Twist, who is in the philanthropy space. And I read her book, The Soul of Money, when I graduated from college. And that was a transformative book and idea of how we might think about money and scarcity and abundance. But my point is, she talks about the fact that we're in an evolution, and that if you think about a bird with 2 wings, for too long, for too many decades, the bird has been flying with 1 wing. And that is, the very male dominated wing, if you will. I'm not doing this justice. She explains it so much more eloquently. But until both wings can really be strong and work together, we cannot elevate humanity to the place that we actually can live in until we can use those wings and soar together.
Well, I'm so here for these resources and book recommendations. I haven't read Huddle yet, so I'm immediately adding that to my list. I actually just recently in the last year read Lynn Twist and really appreciated it. And it's so interesting. It feels like Tara Moore in her book, Playing Big, and in some of her writing and work, talks about those of us who are here in this moment to care deeply about a better future as like the transition team.
I love that.
Yeah, me too. And I think it's just I had a big aha moment shortly before starting my business of just looking around and being what needs to change in the world? And it just felt so clear to me that we needed more feminine leadership, that just, if we are to build a future that actually works for all of us, one in which both wings are activated. To activate both wings, we need to bring in the feminine leadership principles, whether we gender them or not. Things like being in this together, listening to our intuition, being relational, asking for help, receiving, resting, all of these things that are traditionally associated more with the feminine or feminine leadership. And I feel like I'm starting to see it happen in a really exciting way. And it's also clear that we have a long ways to go.
Absolutely.
Well, I'd love to hear for people who are listening. I always love to offer, if there's an opportunity for ideas or baby steps that people can implement shortly after listening to us in their daily lives. I'm curious if you have any ideas or suggestions for how someone who's yes, I'm so all in for all of this. I want more connection and more mutual support in my life right now. What would you recommend as the baby step for someone who's feeling that isolation in their current role and looking to build more community?
Yeah, I love that question. And I would say that the baby step that I would recommend is perhaps more of a challenge than a baby step, but also can be quite simple. And that would be to just make a decision, and to tell someone about the decision, because when you tell someone about making the decision, you become accountable. And so if you're interested in building more community, make that decision and then tell someone that you trust, I'm going to expand my community. I'm going to meet other women in impact. I'm going to be a part of this larger collective. And it doesn't have to be necessarily a really big and scary commitment. It can be a really small step. But when you make a decision and you tell someone that you're making that decision, you become accountable and you start moving towards it.
Yes, that's so practical. And I love it. I think we often forget the power of both one, deciding, and two, saying it out loud. So I love that suggestion. I'm so here for it.
I think that we get so caught up in the busyness of our life that the things that are really important, the things like surrounding ourselves with others who lift us up, the things like taking care of our personal, physical, mental, emotional well-being, the things like resting, like you mentioned, those things that like feel like I can do it later, they just get forgotten. They just get pushed to the bottom of the priority list. And so by making that decision and telling someone about it, I feel like you set yourself up for success, because you can't put it to the bottom of the priority list anymore, especially if you tell someone who is going to be a truth teller, who's going to hold you accountable and maybe check in with you about it.
Definitely. Accountability can be such a game changer.
And I would say, just especially because you asked the question, what if someone is feeling isolated or alone? Like maybe you don't have a truth teller in your life. Maybe you don't have someone who you can make that commitment to. And so I just want to put it out there to your listeners that I absolutely reach out to me on LinkedIn. I know that you are here for it, to connect with women wherever they are, whatever they need. And so if you need a truth teller or someone to make a commitment to, I'm not saying you're committing to coming and taking a seat at the impact table. I'm not expecting that. I'm saying that I will support you, cheer you on, and encourage you to take the steps that are right for you, to find the place that's right for you, to find the people that you want to connect with.
Totally. I'm so here for that invitation, and same. There are so many ways to plug in, I think, to that support, to that cheerleading. I know we're both just so genuinely here for it. And there are so many different ways to be a part of this bigger movement and what we're both building beyond like a formal, like I'm all the way in. So please do not be shy if there's ways we can support you.
It's one of my favorite things. I spoke to a woman just a couple weeks ago from Zimbabwe who was feeling isolated, and she had found me on LinkedIn and we booked a time to connect. And, it doesn't necessarily make sense for her to wake up on US time to connect with women in the US, but, she's that much closer to being able to create community around her because she made a commitment to me, and she made her desires present, and I know is taking steps towards that. So yeah, it's just such a beautiful thing.
Oh, that's so cool. Well, something else that we initially bonded over is our shared desire to create dreamy in-person IRL experiences for our extended communities of impact leaders. And I'm so excited to talk a little bit more about the Connect and Elevate retreat, which, as you know, I'm like, I could happily talk about for like an hour, but I would love to hear from you first. Like, how would you describe your vision for the retreat that we are putting on in Calistoga, October 27th to 29th?
So my vision for the Connect and Elevate retreat in Calistoga is really bringing to life what we both do virtually all month long, all year long, and creating this space for women to connect and learn and grow together. And as you mentioned, creating a dreamy, beautiful experience. And I want our guests to walk away from this experience feeling more connected, feeling more resourced, feeling fully refreshed, and really ready to maximize their impact. And so we're creating and curating 3 beautiful days of just the right amount of work, of play, of rest, of connection. Oh, and also of celebration. That's such an important part, so that we can actually experience this together, look each other in the eyes, sit shoulder to shoulder, and experience these important conversations, these important moments all together in a really beautiful space. And the other thing that I think is important to share is really creating a beautiful and feminine experience, right? We both support women in impact. And I'd love for you to also talk about the invitation for anyone who identifies as a woman and allies. And I know that you have such a beautiful, inclusive language that you share about how we can invite a more inclusive experience. And you are so much more traditionally feminine than me. You've got your floral and this really kind of, feminine experience. And so I love that you are supporting from kind of the experience perspective. And I know that that is going to be such a beautiful part of what we create and the experience that we bring to our guests. And that idea of feminine leadership and embodiment. And I know we're bringing soulful morning routines with yoga and this space. I know you've been there quite a bit. I've visited as well. And, this space is just so sweet and beautiful with cold plunges and mineral springs and just beautiful, delicious food. And just being in Northern California in that time of year is the most, I've said beautiful so many times, but I have no other word for it. Is the most beautiful experience. And so that is what I'm envisioning. And, the women who have already decided to join us, just bringing the small group that will be intimate of even just these women, it's going to be so powerful. And so I can't wait to see who else decides to join us in the coming weeks.
Oh my goodness. Yes. You lit up so much talking about this. I'm also so excited. I got to host a retreat at Dr. Wilkinson's in Calistoga almost, I guess, a month earlier, but about the same time last year. And it was such a powerful reminder for me of how much magic is possible when we gather in person with intention and open hearts and curiosity. I've experienced personally in my own life so many times how putting my life down for some period of time, how getting out of my day-to-day and going to an immersive experience can be so powerful for shifting my perspective on who I am and what I offer. It can really deeply help me and us reset, I think, in a way that can sometimes be challenging when we have life to contend with and we're, just in and out of things and driving around and running errands and opening our laptops. And at the same time, I've also experienced and I'm such a fan of industry events and conferences. I also think there's a lot in that space that could change and be improved. But what I haven't experienced outside of what we're creating and what I've gotten to curate and create in the past is dedicated, intimate space with a transformation and connection as the objective, with people who also care deeply about a better future and about building a better world from all across the impact space. So to get to bring these two things together of the professional in the sense that yes, we are all on the transition team, and the personal in that we're all also humans who care deeply and genuinely want to build relationships with other people, and to put them together in an environment that's not only gorgeous with hot springs and great food and cool rest spots and amazing rooms and all the energy that I dream of for the weekend, but to not only bring those two things together, but to also do it in a space that we're intentionally creating with nothing icky. No one's forcing a business card on you. It's just connection centered and heart centered and not polished talking points and all humanity. And a little bit of magic is just something I'm like so excited to get to create alongside you.
I am so excited as well. And that has been my experience too. 9 years ago, I was invited by a woman named Becky, who I didn't know very well, to come to a retreat. It was a weekend retreat, and it was also in Northern California, not in Calistoga. But I was invited by her, and I was very hesitant. I'm very comfortable going to conferences and doing the offsites and doing all those things, but I didn't know these women very well. I didn't like the idea of putting my computer away for however many hours. I also had very young kids at the time. And so I didn't love the idea of leaving my family to basically go be offline and just retreat. It's, they call it a retreat because that's what we're doing. We're retreating from the hustle of the day to day, which hopefully some folks have found some balance and are not always hustling, but you get the idea. We're retreating. And so I took her up on the invite because I really respected how she showed up in the world. And I drove with 3 women that I didn't know very well. And I showed up, put my phone away, and had a knot in my stomach. And yet, during the course of the weekend, was nourished with beautiful food, with new friends, with conversations that were intimate and important and unlikely to happen in other places. And, I walked away changed, and I walked away recentered, and I walked away remembering what I needed to remember and what I needed to be reminded of. And I think we all have that. We all have that thing that we need to be uniquely reminded of. And so I've gone every year for 9 years. And when I created the impact table, I knew that creating that experience and that retreat and that gathering and that really beautiful offering for our community was something that was really important to me. And so I couldn't be more excited to be partnering with you and the Girls Club Collective to bring even more women into this space, because that's what we all want, is to elevate the voices, elevate the potential, elevate the humanity of all of us, and especially women in impact. And specifically to what you said too, is just going to Dr. Wilkinson's would be like a really amazing weekend. Add to that the intentional reflection and the leadership discussions and the opportunity that we'll give to our guests to step into the spotlight, and the creative workshopping and breakouts and professional headshots and time to rest and reset and fireside chat. Like, it just, I wish we were there right now. Because I just know how transformative, and my opinion on the word transformation. I don't love it, but I just know how transformative that type of experience can be, and how transformative the Connect and Elevate retreat will be.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Yes, times 1,000. I think the only other thing I wanted to add on this, although again, I could talk about it all day, is I also think there's something so special and exciting about getting to collaborate on bringing this to life, because I think so much of what we're both about and what our organizations are about is collaboration, and collaboration making everything more fun, and we're so much better together. And having planned a retreat more or less on my own in the past, it's just been so fun and so generative and so exciting to get to create and vision board and get excited for this together. And as you said, like, the people who have already said yes are amazing. And I'm just like so excited to see who else says yes to this invitation.
I so agree. And I so appreciate you celebrating that, because from the outside, one might look in and kind of put a question mark, like, why these two communities that are so similar? Is that competitive? Is that conflict of interest even? And yet, and I know you do too, believe so deeply in the power of collaboration. The phrase, a rising tide lifts all boats. What we're both here for is to elevate the voices and the leadership of women in impact, and to connect women in social impact. And so what better way to do that than to combine our resources and our passion and our ideas and our energy to be able to create this beautiful space. And as you mentioned before, we both created these communities because they didn't exist before we created them. And you mentioned, seeing this absence of a really intimate space to be able to invite these important conversations for women in impact. So I have big dreams for what the Connect and Elevate retreat and gathering could be this year and in future years, because I think it is so needed. And so I'll get off my soapbox, but it really is going to be an incredible experience. And I'm just so looking forward to sharing that with you and with the members of both of our communities and other women who are really seeking to feel connected and to be a part of this work.
Totally. I could not agree more. And I'll also just offer that if you're hearing this description and this experience and it speaks to you, please know that it is for you, that if you consider yourself a woman changing the world, we consider you a woman changing the world. If you're still working to own the word leader, it's perfect for you too. Like if there's something in you, regardless of your gender expression, that's feeling called to this work and that feels inspired by a vision of feminine leadership that is leaders, in the words of Adrienne Maree Brown, who shift our understanding of how power can be held, we would just be so honored if you came to be a part of this experience because it's going to be magic.
Absolutely.
Now I feel like I'm on my soapbox.
Amazing.
Well, this has been so much fun, Marssie. Obviously, we'll include links to all the things in our show notes, but for people who are listening who want to find out more about you and your work, who want to join us at the retreat, like what are the best ways for people to find you, follow you, get all the latest and greatest info on the magic that we're making?
Yeah. So folks can find me on LinkedIn personally. Fun fact, I'm the only Marssie Versola, maybe in the world, but definitely on LinkedIn. So you can find me on LinkedIn. And then for the Impact Table, you can find us at the Impact Table website. And then, of course, on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook, believe it or not, at Impact Table.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And I believe the quick link, which we'll also have in the notes for the retreat, is impacttable.com/retreat. Is that correct?
That's right.
We'll have that in the show notes. But if you're listening and you want more details, I'm sure reach out to either of us. And clearly we will both happily talk your ear off about it. Well, thank you so much for making time, Marssie. This has been such a fun conversation, and I've so appreciated an opportunity to get to know you better, to hear about the goats, and to talk about what's coming up this fall.
Thank you too, Liz. This has been so much fun.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Women Changing the World podcast. Please rate and review the podcast wherever you're currently listening to it, and don't forget to subscribe for future episodes. You can find me on Instagram at liz.best, that's lis.best, and you can find Girls Club Collective at girls_club_collective. You can also find us on LinkedIn by searching for Liz Best, that's my name, LASBEST, and Girls Club Collective. Join our mail list by visiting the Girls Club Collective homepage and scrolling down to the bottom. You'll be in the loop on upcoming events, retreats, and opportunities to make magic with us, and you'll also receive a monthly love note from my heart to your inbox. I am so excited to keep in touch.